We're live.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Standard Committee meeting. All had the agenda. I know Anne's been popping some stuff in the chat box as we go for later on in the meeting. But first of all, if I can ask any apologies for absence.
Yeah, we've had apologies from Dr. Paul Worthington.
Thank you very much. And before I move on to declarations of interest, just so that we capture them all in one go, I'd like to welcome Jill to her first meeting here this evening. And just before we go on to the declarations of interest, and you can make any if you have any, let's just go around and introduce yourself. My name's Andrew Mitchell. We met on the recruitment exercise for yourself, and I'm currently chair of the Standards Committee, so welcome.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
John, I'm just looking at some names here. John, do you want to just say hello? And
yes, good evening. I'm John Davis, and I represent the community councils on the Standards Committee.
Thank you. David, I can see you there.
Yes, I'm David Fairweather. I'm Newport City Councillor and the Conservative member for Alterinne.
Richard, thank you, David.
Hi Jill, I'm Richard Morgan. I'm an independent member like you, and I only joined back in June, so I'm relatively new like you.
Thank you. Kerry.
Good evening, Jill. My name's Kerry Watkins, and as per Andrew, we met during your interview process, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Standards Committee, and can I welcome you to the group?
Thank you. I'll do the other, I'll come on to the other important people. Anne, yourself, if you're here.
Hi, good evening. My name is Anne Jenkins. I'm the governance team leader. I'll be producing this meeting this evening.
And Sam.
Hi Jill, I'm Sam. I'm the governance support officer who runs the meeting, and I'm taking the minutes.
And last but not least, Gareth.
Yeah, again, I think we've met Jill. Gareth Price, Head of Law and Regulation and the Council's Monitoring Officer.
Great, thank you all. So that's ideal for that one. So if I can just ask for any declarations of interest, please, from anybody. Okay, I shall take the silence as no declarations need to be declared. Let's move on to the next item, item 3 on the agenda, minutes of the previous meeting. Pages 3 to 8, if you're going through the scroll documents from there. So if we take it first of all for accuracy. So page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, and page 7, page 8 being a blank page. And then if we go through it from any matters arising, so page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, and the last part of page 7, as I said, page 8 being a blank page in this case. So if we're all content, I will sign those off for us. Thank you very much. The next part then, the Ombudsman's annual report, pages 9 to 12. So Gareth, I think you're going to talk us through this about what we've done.
Well, not so much what you've done, Chair, as what the Council has done.
Yeah.
This is the Ombudsman's annual letter to the Council.
Sorry, the wrong way around, yes.
Maladministration complaints during the completed financial year and also Code of Conduct complaints. So obviously the Code of Conduct complaints will be of more concern to Standards Committee, but for information, the letter also refers to the maladministration complaints that have been reported to Cabinet and will be reported to Governance and Audit Committee later on in the month. So yeah, in terms of headline figures, as you will have seen, it's maladministration complaints against public bodies have gone down slightly in the last sort of 12 months compared to the previous one. And in the annual letter to the Council, the Ombudsman has highlighted the sort of those parts of the service that have generated the most complaints. the good news is that obviously very few were being referred to the Ombudsman. Most of those complaints that the council dealt with over the last year were resolved either through a local settlement or through some form of apology. So in only 5 cases was the Ombudsman required to actually intervene and look at those complaints of maladministration, and none of those resulted in a public interest report against the authority. So that was good news on the maladministration front. Generally on codes of conduct complaints, nationally, the numbers of complaints that were referred to the Ombudsman went up significantly compared to the previous year. In fact, he was saying that it increased nationally by 47% compared with the previous year, and he'd received over 500 new complaints and took forward over 300 of those for investigation during those completed 12 months. And that was an increase both in terms of complaints against primary authorities, city councils and borough councils like Newport, and also the community councils, John. So a significant increase really across the board. In terms of the figures for Newport, we'll touch on these later when we come to your annual report as a standards committee. You'll see that the numbers are slightly out of sync, and that's because this is the last sort of completed financial year, whereas your annual report goes from November to November. So that explains the difference in the statistics in terms of numbers of complaints. But in terms of the last completed financial year, there were only 3 complaints during that period referred to the Ombudsman, 2 in relation to city councillors and 1 in relation to a Langston community councillor, none of which resulted in any findings of misconduct or any formal investigation. So that was good news. One general comment the Ombudsman makes in his report about code of conduct complaints is that he's receiving a lot of complaints, particularly from smaller town and community councils, and what he regards as a sort of low-level tit-for-tat complaints, if you like, in terms of clashes of personality and issues regarding the membership of those committees. It might be something that John is familiar with. And again, this probably reflects on something we'll deal with later in terms of recommended changes to the framework. But really what he's saying is these low-level complaints shouldn't be referred to him, that they take up a lot of time in terms of investigation. And what he's looking at really is for a more mature approach, if you like, in terms of resolving these low-level complaints, largely about lack of respect and consideration. For those complaints to try and be resolved sensibly and locally. So that's an encouragement, I think, for those numbers of complaints to reduce by simplifying the way in which they're dealt with. But that was the only thing in terms of the annual report that I wanted to mention, Chair. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments that members might want to make.
Thank you for that, Gareth. Floor's open if anyone's got any comments or questions for Gareth. I think everyone looks quite content there. I can't see any hands up, so in that case then thank you for that, Gareth. So item 5 on the agenda is review of the ethical framework. From there, and that for us is page 11. Sorry, is pages 13 through to 20 if you're following through the scroll down part of it. Gareth, do you want to lead on this?
Yes, probably a nice sort of segue into this from the previous item. This is something I've mentioned to committee previously, that prior to the next local elections in May. And in the light of the new legislation that will take effect between now and then, Welsh Government WLGA commissioned this independent review of the ethical standards framework in Wales from Richard Penn, who's also the chair of the remuneration panel for Wales, and he's been looking at this for a number of months. They were conscious of the fact that the original framework has now been in existence probably since early 2006, and the code hasn't been amended for a number of years. So they thought this was a good chance to have a look again at the current framework in Wales to see whether it was fit for purpose. That report is now being published in full, and I've included the hyperlink to that report should you want to read it at your leisure. But what I've tried to sort of pick out in the cover report is some of the salient points really that come out of the Richard Penn report. That report is now being considered by the Minister for Finance and Local Government with a view to changing the Model Code of Conduct between now and next May. So what we will expect come the new intake of councillors, city councillors and community councillors next May is that there'll be a new Model Code of Conduct that they will have to sign up to and abide by come next May. Not significant changes, as you'll see from the rest of this report. It's just a bit of fine tuning, if you like, in terms of what's there and strengthening some of the provisions in the current code. The view is it remains fit for purpose. The consensus is that the framework in Wales is a lot better than the equivalent in England, because as we mentioned before, in England, they've sort of turned the clock back, if you like, and they only really deal with serious financial irregularities now in England. In Wales, we still have this framework for enforcement that involves the monitoring officers, yourselves as standards committees, and the adjudication panel. So that's considered to be a more robust method of enforcing the ethical standard framework in Wales. So there's no suggestion that should change. There is a recommendation from the report that there are elements of that code that could be strengthened. There's reference to the Equality Act. Obviously, since the code was first enacted, numbers of additions to the Equality Act in terms of protected characteristics. So I think the feeling is that the code could be strengthened by specific reference to those equalities duties. So that will be in there. There's some minor changes that they recommend about councillors' home addresses not being published on the register. Now, again, I make the point in the report that Newport has done that for a number of years. I think, particularly in view of some of the recent concerns about personal security of councillors and MPs and so on, I think the feeling was that home addresses were too sensitive and shouldn't be published on the website so that people could see where councillors live. So that will be a change as from next May. In Newport, we've done that for a number of years because there is provision in the current code where sensitive personal information can be redacted on grounds of personal security. So, for the last probably 5 years or more, we have redacted from the declaration of interest form. We've redacted councillor home addresses. So that is something that we already comply with. I know it's something that the Councillor Wilcox has experienced in the past in terms of that requirement in terms of personal safety. So that is something we already comply with. There is also a suggestion that in terms of enforcement, members should also sign up in their declaration to agree to mandatory training on the Code of Conduct. Again, it's council policy that city councillors must undertake Code of Conduct training. And I've reported to Standards Committee previously that during the last sort of council administration, most of the 50 members, I think 47 out of 50, have undertaken the compulsory training. I think to reinforce that, they want new councillors to actually sign up in their declaration of acceptance of office, not just to abide by the code, but to agree to undertake that mandatory training. So again, there's some reinforcement there in terms of what councillors sign up to. Again, there's a recommendation that there should be a standardised amount in terms of declarations of gifts and hospitality. It does make sense in terms of standardising that throughout Wales. previously it was left to the discretion of individual councils to set that limit. The limit in Newport, as we know, is £25. But that said, the advice to councillors is that even if you're offered gifts and hospitality of less than that amount, it doesn't mean that you should accept them. The test is really whether that leave yourself open to criticism in terms of favoritism, if you like, in terms of receiving that gift and hospitality. But yeah, the suggestion that there should be a standardized amount sort of makes sense, and again wouldn't be an issue for us as the in Newport. So in terms of the code itself, I don't think there's much there that will change, and that's really more for information. Significantly, I think one of the most wide-ranging changes could be in relation to the enforcement regime, and it's just something I touched on in terms of code of conduct complaints with community councillors. As you know, at the moment, all complaints have to go to the Ombudsman before they can be referred back to you as a standards committee. I think part of the criticism has always been that very few complaints then come back to you because the Ombudsman is taking a view not just on whether there's any misconduct, but whether it merits any sanction. And I think the feeling was that really should be a view taken by standards committees, and therefore more of these complaints should be referred back to you and not just dealt with under local resolution protocols. Although we can deal with low-level complaints without them going to the Ombudsman, you've got no powers of sanction. It's only if the Ombudsman refers something back to you could you as a committee take a view, even with a sort of fairly low-level complaint, that you actually want to formally impose a sanction. So the suggestion here, and the Ombudsman is quite amenable to this, is that there would be a much wider role in future for monitoring officers and standards committees in terms of the investigation and dealing with these complaints at a local level, which I suppose in one respect is good news, but I think concern has been expressed that will have resource implications, for monitoring officers, deputy monitoring officers in terms of local investigations. When you look at the numbers of potential complaints that could be dealt with, and also will have implications for standards committees if you have to deal with a larger number of these complaints. So that is something of a double-edged sword, really. It's good that the Ombudsman acknowledges that there could be a strengthening of that role for local determination of complaints, but there is that concern, particularly amongst monitoring officers, that the throwing back investigations at a local level would substantially increase workload, and it's almost going back to the English model in the old days, where the Ombudsman in England didn't get involved. It was ethical standards officers in councils that undertook all of these investigations, and that proved to be unworkable in England. So there are slight concerns, shall we say, about that part of the proposal in the Richard Penn report. That said, that will require wider legislation. So the chances are that those changes will come later than the next May, if at all. But certainly that's a recommendation that the Minister is considering at the moment with a view to changing the legislation in Wales and strengthening those powers. So I think that's really all I wanted to say, Chair, in terms of the headlines in the report. Like I said, the Minister will now consider the recommendations. The intention is to amend the code certainly before May, and then consider any wider changes to the framework in due course. So happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you, Gareth. Anyone, anything for Gareth? Oh, Councillor Wilcox, good evening and welcome.
And apologies for being late, Chair. I hope you had my message.
We did, thank you.
We need that new relief road for the M4, don't we? I voted for it, for Newport. but there we are. Anyway, Gareth, is the cost implications? There are two issues following from what I heard from your report. So, is there a cost implication for councils for this, and also the time for monitoring officers? You know, is this Welsh Government shifting more responsibility onto local government?
In terms of cost implication, obviously there's no budget that follows this, so we'll have to deal with this within existing resources as always.
Yeah.
And that's the concern, I think.
Yeah.
Well, you can see from some of the reports from the Ombudsman how long it takes sometimes to conclude some of these investigations.
Yes.
So
yes.
he will still undertake the complaints into the more serious cases of maladministration and misconduct. But even the lower level complaints coming back to us, particularly with the sort of the proliferation of complaints, if you like, at community council level, if we had to investigate all of those, it would have considerable implications both for myself and my deputy.
Yes.
And as you say, there's no extra resource coming our way to deal with that. It's not Welsh Government, I think, shifting the responsibility, because ironically, many standards committees have actually made this comment in as part of the consultation process.
Yeah.
That they would like more power.
Okay.
That they think maybe the Ombudsman is doing too much in terms of you're not just determining if there's misconduct there, but also determining whether it merits a sanction or investigation. So ironically, a lot of this standards committees have pushed for.
Okay.
But if it does come back, there will be resource implications, and there won't be any extra funding coming with it. I'm pretty certain about that.
Okay, I just wonder whether there should be, in your view, should there be a letter sent from the council to note these resource implications? Because that's formally, I would have felt I would have needed to do that.
Well, we're not actually being consulted on this. The report before you is just for information.
Okay.
Now, we haven't really been consulted on the report. It's just been published, and there was a statement by the minister just saying, I'll now think about the recommendations. There was a promise that we would be consulted further if she decided to proceed with the changes to the enforcement framework. So I think if these changes, these more radical changes are introduced,
yes,
then I would wait until that formal consultation on that before we submit comments. So there's nothing for you to do at this stage other than note the position, but when we are consulted about future changes that would have those implications, that would be the time I would suggest to write in response to the consultation.
Chair, in that case, Chair, can I note that we note that, and that there is a possibility that we will need to write at a future date?
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Wilcox. Councillor Wilcox, just before you put yourself off mute or whatever you're going to do, I wonder if we could just ask you to introduce yourself. We've got a new member with us tonight, a new independent. And Jill, I do apologise because I haven't asked you to introduce yourself. I was just looking through my notes. So, Councillor Wilcox, if you just...
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. Hello, Jill Newton. I'm Councillor Debbie Wilcox. I'm formerly the leader of the council, but I now knock around Westminster for most of the week in the House of Lords, trying to make as much of a nuisance as myself as possible. And yes, I can see Councillor Fairweather on the call, and he knows what a nuisance I can make of myself. So it's very nice to meet you. I represent the Gary Mays Glass ward until next May, when sadly after 18 years I'll be stepping down.
Oh, that's a great shame. Yes, yeah, busy person. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Jill, can I just leave it to you then? I do apologise for...
It's fine, no problem. So yes, I've had a career in local government, majority of it in democratic services in Cardiff Council. So I've had experience of governance and democracy and the processes of ethical standards. Quite hands-on experience in Cardiff, as you can imagine. So I've worked with elected members, I've worked with community councillors and lead officers. So I just hopefully can, work with the committee and provide some support in the work that you're doing. And it's just nice to hear some of the changes that are coming about, which I think changes that were needed in many cases. So yeah, I look forward to working with you.
Thank you for that, Jill, and my apologies for missing you off on the first time around.
Yes, no problem.
Thank you everyone for that. If we've got no further comments or questions for Gareth, we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is our standards committee report. This is what I should have said, Gareth. This is what we've been doing, and it's marvellous.
Yes, yeah. Every year, council submits an annual report to council, which sets out the work that you've done in the past 12 months. So this is from November to November. It's reported to council in November every year. So this goes back over the last 12 months and summarises the work and the changes in membership of the committee over the past 12 months. So as is customary, I've taken the liberty of drafting something for you as a starter. But really, it's open for discussion now in terms of what you as a committee, it's your report. It's your report to council, so you need to be happy in terms of what's included and also the emphasis within the report in terms of what needs to be drawn to the attention of council. So it's before you as a draft. Like I said, this will go to council on the 23rd, I think, of November. So once you've agreed the final report, what you would normally do is invite one of the councillors, if you like, to present that to council on your behalf, if you're happy to follow that procedure. But subject to that, like I said, I drafted an outline in terms of the work programme for last year and summarise what I think are the salient points in terms of what you've done. I have attached a full copy of your determination in that one misconduct case because I thought it was important enough to draw it to the attention of full council in terms of lessons to be learned. But again, that's really a matter for you as a committee as to whether you think that's appropriate. So nothing further I want to say, Chair. I'll happily open it up for discussion and debate amongst the committee.
Thank you, Gareth. And firstly, thank you for doing this. This is a draft. I didn't realise that we'd been so busy with all the things that are going on that you've got in there, you know, for that said. It was certainly thank you for that. Just taking it sort of backwards, if you like. I certainly think that we should attach a copy of that judgment when the report goes out. I think it sends the right message out at that point as well. As far as the rest of the report is concerned, for me, I'm not sure there's anything else I would want to put in there. And I don't want to make work for people, you know, when something we've got is working and has worked, as I'm sure you've drafted others for these in the past for other standard committees in the past. So what I'll do is I'm just going to put it out on the floor there for everybody now. We should have all had a chance to have a look at it, and any sort of comments or questions or issues you have around it. It's either Gareth or I, or we can decide as a committee together. So, you know, please, it's opened on the floor now.
Gareth, I wonder if you could clarify a few points for me, please, if you wouldn't mind. On clause 2.2 of the report, we're identifying in our forward work programme, we're going to introduce additional training for community council clerks on maintaining of the statutory registers, etc. Do we have a time frame for that?
No, it's something that we've been meaning to do for a while. The difficulty is obviously with remote meetings at the moment, it's sometimes difficult to undertake that training. That said, I know with one of the community councils, I think we've got a Zoom meeting so early in December to pick that up in terms of refresher training, because I think they've got a lot of new members, co-opted members filling casual vacancies. So we put that into the diary, but the difficulty is, I suppose, training members now, because we're within 6 months of the new elections. We also know from the earlier report that the code of conduct is about to be changed slightly. So, yeah, I think what we're doing at the moment is I'm picking up queries on an ad hoc basis from clerks. So where they need advice, we've got a lot of new community council clerks who have actually taken up office in the last 12 months. So where they've got queries, they tend to direct them through Anne's team, and I pick them up on a sort of piecemeal or ad hoc basis. Where they've asked for specific training, then obviously we've tried to put something in and do that remotely where possible. But I think in terms of more structured training, my inclination would be to leave that until next May and do it as part of the new induction programme.
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with you there, and similarly with the amendment to the Code of Conduct, which are being changed now in May as well, so we could incorporate it all into one, couldn't we?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. Yeah, thank you, Gareth.
On the other thing, Chair, on that one, obviously in terms of training, WLGA are working with local councils to change the training modules for members as part of the new induction programme. The idea again is to try and standardise the training across the whole of Wales, and a lot of it will be delivered online as well as face-to-face training. So there'll be online training that members can undertake as part of this new induction programme. So between now and May, we're working on a new training module for Code of Conduct training.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Kerry, for that. Anyone else? Jill, have you seen anything in there you like or dislike? Anything you need to comment on as your with your background?
No, I think it's a good report, standards committee report. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Jill. Richard, take it you're content.
Yes, I thought it was a very, very comprehensive report, covered everything I'd expect to see. So yeah, I was more than content with it.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Farwether, any comments? Or are you content as well?
No comments.
Thank you. Councillor Wilcox, you've had something to say, but anything else from yourself?
Thank you, Andrew. No, as ever, Gareth's report is excellent and nothing further to add. It comprehensively describes the work of the past year. So thank you very much, Gareth.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Councillor Davis.
Yes, I think it's a comprehensive report. Everything's covered. I would just like to reiterate training for community councillors. I think that'll be an important aspect after the elections in May. And it's hard to believe that some training is not already compulsory. I mean, if you sit on a school governors, there's certain training courses that you have to complete, and unless you will be sort of struck off after a period of time. So I think the training should be made compulsory for certain courses.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. On that note, Gareth, I think that's got the green light for you on there. So thank you very much on our behalf for drafting that for us. And it's ready to go whenever you're going to present, or the 23rd for the council.
Yeah, thank you. And if one of the councillors would be happy to move or present that in council, we'll give them a form of words to introduce it. So the one thing I should have said, Chair, is of course, until now, this report has been presented on a voluntary basis annually. Actually, from next April, it becomes a legislative requirement under the Local Government Elections Wales Act for standards committees to produce this annual report. So we're ahead of the game actually in terms of what we're doing there. What we might need to consider in future years is maybe sort of bringing the reporting year into line with the financial year, so there's less of a gap in between, but we can look at that. The important thing is that we already produce these annual reports in a format that meets the requirements of the legislation, so we don't need to change anything.
Thank you, Gareth.
Chair, can I ask Gareth at
yes,
this point, do we know if the meeting on the 23rd is still virtual or in person?
The council meetings are all still virtual.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have not sort of reintroduced the face-to-face meetings yet because there are still restrictions in terms of occupancy numbers in the civic centre, and we're still undertaking work in the council chamber, which Anne is heavily involved in programme managing at the moment, to actually fit up new cameras Again, so just for information, Chair, under the new legislation, from next May, even if the COVID restrictions are not in place, there's a requirement for what we call hybrid meetings, so that any members who can't so physically join a meeting in the Civic Centre can still dial in remotely. But what that does mean in terms of hybrid meetings is that we've got to upgrade the IT infrastructure and kit within the council chamber. So we're doing that at the moment, and until we've completed that work, then we'll be in a position to proceed with the hybrid meetings. So yeah, at the moment, still fully remote, I'm afraid.
Right, Chair, just for a comment for others, that will really help democracy, allowing people to attend hybridly. And just for your information, the COVID rate in Westminster compared to the rest of London, on the on the Palace of Westminster, it's 4 times higher. So we put ourselves at risk every day working in person, and just in terms of numbers, it's a very dangerous place to be. But there we are. We don't have that hybrid availability, and 4 times a higher risk of getting COVID is really, quite concerning.
It's a big risk for you. Thank you for that, Councillor Wilcox. Can I just say then, for our councillors here, can one of you liaise with Gareth so that it can be presented for us, please?
How is it chosen, Gareth? Because last year Councillor Hourahane did it. So would it be Councillor Fairweather's turn?
I mean, normally it would be somebody from the majority party that would volunteer, but this is apolitical, so we're quite happy for any one of you to do it. Yeah, but if Councillor Hourahane is prepared to do it, then we'll happily provide him with a form of words. I think he's probably the longest serving member of Standards Committee, so that would be normally the custom and practice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, Gareth. Just as an overrider on that, should then there not be anybody, I'm more than happy just to present it virtually to the council. Again, it flies the flag for us from that side of it. But thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so if we move along, item 7, Chair's announcements. I've not got any announcements to make at this moment in time. Item 8 on the agenda is complaints update. So Gareth, can I pass this back over to you to lead on, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, obviously since the last updated committee, we've had that one misconduct hearing, and as we set out in the report, there was no appeal against your finding, your determination. So that sanction has now been implemented, and that councillor is currently serving that 3-month suspension that was imposed. Your other recommendation that she be removed from the health board, again, will go to council as part of the appointments process in November. So in terms of the other outstanding complaints, again, I've already referenced them in the draft annual report. There were a number of outstanding complaints, if you remember, against various community councillors. We've had a reference back from the Ombudsman to say that the 2 of those complaints have not been accepted for formal investigation. There were a number of complaints about the chair of one particular community council, largely concerning the way in which she chaired a particular meeting and how a decision was taken on a planning matter. But again, the Ombudsman took the view that the chairing of a meeting of itself was not a breach of ethical standards. It was largely a training issue, if you like, in terms of chairing meetings, and again, issues with the clerk to the community council was more of an employment issue. It wasn't a code of conduct issue. So all of those complaints against that particular chair of the community council have not been accepted for investigation. And there was one other complaint, I think, about a failure to show respect. Again, that wasn't accepted for formal investigation. So at the moment, there are 4 complaints still with the Ombudsman from community councillors where we're still awaiting a decision as to whether or not he is prepared to accept those for formal investigation. And I'll report those back to you next time if we hear anything more.
Thank you, Gareth. Much appreciated. On that note, anything for Gareth about those? And obviously, he's not going to tell us too more until we know where they come back with the Ombudsman. But thank you for that, Gareth, for that update.
Well, just to say, I should have said on that misconduct determination, it has been published as per the requirements of the regulations. So we did give public notice of that. It's on deposit for public inspection at the moment, should any member of the public wish to view that. And a full copy of the decision has also been uploaded onto the website as required by the regulations. So we've published the decision as well as promulgating it to all the participants.
Fine, so we're watertight on that side of it then.
Yeah,
we've done
what we have
okay.
to do in terms of publication. Lovely.
Thank you very much, Gareth, for that. And obviously, thank you from the committee for the support you gave us that day. You know, it was a very interesting sort of afternoon work on that side of it. So next item on the agenda, item 9, is the date of the next meeting. And we've got 5:30 on the 6th of January 2022 as our next meeting. And on that note, there's nothing else on the agenda. Thank you very much for your attendance this evening. Thank you, Anne and Sam. I know you've got this sorted out, Sam, for a live event at last. So thank you very much indeed for that. And thank you, Anne. Your attendance is always welcome, and for the input you have into getting the other part of it sorted out. So on that note, have a good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, and see you. It'll be in the new year now in January 22. So thank you now. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.